Hey guys.
Hi.
All right. Hello to y'all and hello to our audience. I want to welcome everyone to Six Bridges Book Festival. I'm your moderator, Stephanie Newton, and I am so excited to be here tonight with authors R. Eric Thomas and Alia Volz. I'm going to introduce them and their books and let them read a little bit, and then we'll open it up for questions and discussion. Before we get started, there's a little bit of housekeeping. If you're new to Zoom, you'll see there's a chat function at the bottom, and then it pulls up a panel on the right. Please use that, ask questions, feel free to type something in there that you want to ask either of these authors. We want you involved. And then you'll also see in the chat at the top, I've included links to each of the authors' websites, as well as the Central Arkansas Library Systems page where you can go buy these books. Please, please, please support these authors and this programming by buying a book for yourself or for a friend. Lastly, we're so thankful to all the sponsors of the Six Bridges Book Fest and all the supporters of CALS who help make this event possible every year, even virtually and in a pandemic. So let me start by telling you a little bit about these talented folks and their books, and then I'll stop talking and let them each read a passage from their work. R. Eric Thomas is a writer of essays, plays, a daily humor column for Elle.com, and now books, including his book of essays, Here For It, or How to Save Your Soul in America. Lin-Manuel Miranda said Here For It is like pop culture obsessed, Sedaris level, laugh out loud funny, which is totally true, but also be prepared for that Here For It can also make you cry. Eric has a way of switching between humor and tenderness for both himself and other people that makes his writing so personable and real. Alia Volz is the author of Home Baked, My Mom, Marijuana, and the Stoning of San Francisco, a memoir about her mother's role in the burgeoning marijuana industry in California, particularly when it comes to magic brownies, her mother's specialty. Home Baked is so many things at once. It's a deeply personal tale about the author's parents. It's about how her parents' choices shaped her own early life, and it's all surrounded by the layers of history and cultural context that was San Francisco in the 70s and 80s. It's an epic, decades-long journey she takes you on, but what it all boils down to is the story of her mom's insanely successful pot brownie business while Alia was a child. Both Eric and Alia have won numerous awards and honors, and their work has appeared in national publications and on radio shows like Fresh Air and The Moth. And instead of listing all those here, I encourage y'all to click on their author websites, follow them on social media, and keep up with what they've got going on. So now let's hear y'all read a little from your work. I think we're gonna start with Alia.
Thank you so much, Stephanie, and hello, everybody out there. I wish I could be there in person, but it's so nice to be able to connect in some way. So thank you very much to the Central Arkansas Library System for making this happen and for inviting me to the festival in the first place. I'm just thrilled to be doing this with Six Bridges. So that was a lovely introduction. I don't think I have to tell you that much more. My folks, basically, they had the first high volume cannabis edibles business in San Francisco, which spanned the disco mad 1970s and the radical politics of that era, and in moving through the AIDS era to the dawn of medical marijuana and modern cannabis as we know it today. So I'm going to read from fairly late in the book. I'm just going to dive in. This is from the very first glimmerings, really, of the AIDS crisis in San Francisco. And it starts out with my mom. December 1981, Mare did a pre-Christmas brownie run. So basically she's out delivering brownies to her customers in the neighborhood. She was making her way up Castro Street toward Market when she saw a small crowd studying a poster outside the Star Pharmacy. She leaned in to check it out. Gay cancer, it said across the top. Below that was a series of graphic Polaroid photos of sores on a man's legs, feet, and arms. The back of Mare's neck prickled. Hadn't she seen one of those little spots on Roger's wrist that afternoon? Weird, she thought, as she continued on to do the next deal. The flyers were the work of Bobby Campbell, a handsome 29-year-old registered nurse studying to be a nurse practitioner specializing in gay men's health. Bobby was among the first people diagnosed with Kaposi sarcoma. He was also one of the first in the country to sense the enormity of the danger. As a public health nurse, he was not going to sit back and watch. Declaring himself the Kaposi sarcoma poster boy, Bobby began a column in the San Francisco Sentinel, a gay newspaper, detailing his experiences. His first piece, "I Will Survive," ran later that month. The tone of the column was buoyant and witty, but it dispensed crucial information. And although Bobby would not, in fact, survive, he would die within 4 years. He became a hero of the AIDS epidemic. Until that point, there had been a few AP articles buried with other low priority news. Rare skin cancer seen in young homosexuals, fatal pneumonia caused by a common fungus. It was enough to interest a couple of journalists and concern some doctors, but there were still fewer than 300 identified cases nationwide. It started in that small way: whispers, rumors, something going around, people feeling fatigued and vaguely ill, a recurring flu, a stomach bug that wouldn't quit, these painless purple spots showing up out of nowhere. It was still business as usual in the Castro, and business was good enough. With Mayor coming down to the city once a month, customers stocked up on larger quantities of magic brownies. Beck's Motor Lodge could be rowdy on weekends, popular among Castro boys for both cruising and tricking for money. On the plus side, that meant people came and went for various reasons, which Mayor thought gave her cover. By the way, this is all very illegal in these days. Safe to say, Beck's personnel didn't want to know what people did in their rooms. Sunshine, a photographer and cook who'd been a customer for years, usually bought 5 or 6 dozen. She'd sell some to friends and keep the rest in her freezer to last through the next visit. Sunshine remembers approaching Beck's and seeing a buck-naked guy standing in the picture window overlooking Market Street. She thought it was weird, so she mentioned it to Mayor, who shrugged it off. Apparently, it was this guy's deal to hang out nude in the front window so he could cruise without ever having to put clothes down or walk down to the street. His tricks could come up and find him. Sunshine also remembers there always being a child there. She'd enter the motel room and Mayor would whisper, "Shh, Alia's sleeping." It wasn't true that I was there every time, but I adored going to the city with my mom. As we sailed through puffs of fog crossing the bridge, we'd belt out, "San Francisco, here we come, da-da-da, right back where we started from." I loved the sound of traffic below the motel windows. I loved customers waltzing through the door with the sing-song, "Hello, darlings," how the damp night air would trail them, clinging to their leather jackets and smelling of the street and the ocean. How their hair was never shaggy like up north, but spiked and dyed bright colors or coiffed into artful shapes. I loved that everyone told me how tall I'd gotten since the last time. I loved shrill city laughter, the boldness of it, the magic of carelessly caring so much about everything. I loved going to Sylvester's, that sumptuous wonderland of fabric and antiques and music, but I especially loved the barge, which was any bed my mom captained. Just floating along on that squeaky motel bed with the grown-ups, the whisper of money in my mom's hands, the dry snap of rubber bands when she counted it out at the end of the weekend. If that environment was too much for a girl of 4 and 5, I didn't notice. My mom was there. I was safe.
That's
Thank
wonderful. Thank you so much. All right, Eric, we'll pass it to you.
I'm also really glad to be here. I'm sorry I can't be there in person. I was really looking forward to visiting Arkansas for the first time, and I will be able to be there at some point in the future. My book is a series of essays, all of which investigate living at the intersection of being Black, queer, Christian, and American. And some of the essays deal with all of those identities. Some of them deal with one or two. It's also a love letter to books and specifically to libraries. And so I'm especially glad to be here with the Central Arkansas Library System. I'm not going to read a passage about libraries tonight, but you can read it in the book. I'm going to read a silly little section from an essay called Unsuccessful Black Hair. And this is from the beginning. And I don't think you need to know anything going in. I certainly didn't. I am currently bald. I say currently because I'm holding out for medical science. Yes, I've heard of Rogaine. No, I haven't tried it. I don't want my hair back. I want to take a pill and get John Legend's hair. I know what you're thinking. Have I been sleeping on John Legend's hair? Is it extraordinary? No, it's fine. It's very nice hair. It looks good all the time without being showy about it. I'm not asking for a crown of glory. I just want a nice, unremarkable, full head of hair that does its job competently and attractively, like the third lead on a crime procedural. Is this too much for modern science to give? Other people seem to notice my baldness more than me, which makes sense because I'm incredibly humble and never look in a mirror. Also, I kind of just don't care. But it's still a surprise to me when little kids draw me as a round-faced bald man. Are little kids drawing me a lot? Well, yes, they are. Thanks for asking. I'm a kindergarten art model. It's a living. I look at these drawings and I see Gordon from Sesame Street or Steve Harvey, but never myself. I suppose I don't know what I look like. Or maybe I'm just waiting to memorize my look after I get my John Legend treatment. My hair, when I had hair, was no great shakes. I didn't really have a plan for my hair. I was too shy to try most fun hairstyles and felt like when it was just cut normally, it didn't have any of the verve or sheen or glow of other people's styles. I now realize that's because I wasn't putting any product in it. Products with names like verve, sheen, and glow. I mean, it said it right there on the tub of metallic blue gel, but how was I supposed to know? Most of the time, I don't think about my hair, which in and of itself seems like a dereliction of my duty as a Black person. I'm going to pause there. The original line was, it seemed like a dereliction of my duty as a Black person, but my editor was like, absolutely not.
Take that pun out.
Right? It was like pun number 7,000. She was like, okay, enough. Hair is integral to cultural Blackness, how we do our hair, what products are available to us, whether we let white people touch it, we don't. And the messaging we receive from non-Black people about our hair, it's all part of the experience. I know this. I'm sometimes affected by it, but I find it hard to internalize. I'm proud to be Black, but I've never been able to harness pride about my hair. I just don't really connect with it, or the lack thereof. Baldness is a legitimate hair choice too. Why don't I just make Taye Diggs my hair idol and keep it moving? Do I look like Taye Diggs? No. But has the tyranny of facts ever stopped me before? Again, no. One year for Halloween, I went as Kanye West. Sort of. I wore sunglasses and a sports coat because I'm the laziest Halloween dresser known to man. Did my bald ass look like Kanye West? No. Somebody asked me if I was Lex Luthor. This is hilarious to me because this person was obviously costume colorblind and very woke. But still, let's not be ridiculous about it. You see my bald ass walking down the street on Halloween wearing a suit. You don't think, hey, that's Lex Luthor. I can tell from the context clues. You also don't think, hey, that's Kanye West. More likely, you think that guy is dressed as Kareem Abdul-Jabbar. Or, most likely, why is that bald man going to a job interview at 8 p.m. on Halloween night? And why does the suit have shorts? Because I'm dressed up as sexy Kareem Abdul-Jabbar, also known as Lex Luthor Vandross. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Halloween is soon. I feel like you might have just inspired some Halloween costumes.
I'm all about a deranged Halloween costume or a mashup. So please go wild. Go as sexy Kareem Abdul-Jabbar.
All right. That was awesome. Thanks, guys. I wanted to start the discussion. I'll start with a couple questions and then we'll check out the chat box and see if anyone's got some. I thought a good place to start might be identity, which Eric, you touched on, is a big part of your book. Subculture is a big part of both of your books, I would say. I thought that was really interesting because before I read them, looking at the covers, I thought I didn't know what they might have in common, what the overlap would be besides being works of memoir and creative nonfiction. But that turns out to be a really central theme in both your works. So I'd love to hear from both of you about how the themes of otherness or identity or any of the particular subcultures are at play in your work. And whoever wants to start, go for
it. I love these
I'm
Zoom
just waiting
things
for
because
you.
we're just like staring at each other.
Staring contest.
I'll say briefly, I think a lot of the work in my book is about the journey from literally from the margins to the center of the page, and whether I'm talking about my identity as a Black person and trying to figure out even within Blackness, how I identify Blackness and how I locate myself within Blackness or within queer culture. And even within Christian culture, I'm a progressive Christian, and there's, the larger Christian culture in America is largely, well, I don't know the numbers, but the narrative is about evangelical Christianity. And so these subcultures underneath the larger cultures have their own rules and structures as well. And sort of figuring out how to access those while still maintaining authenticity is something that's really interesting to me. I also think, I write a little bit in the book about feeling part of a longer continuum of history. And I feel that as a Black person, and particularly really strongly as a gay person. And that's one of the things that really jumped out to me in thinking about Alia's work and Alia's book is there is this sometimes well-documented, sometimes hidden or erased history of queer and gay cultures in the world and in the United States that I feel a certain inheritance of. And figuring out how to access that has been a really interesting and sometimes difficult thing because, as she writes about, like a lot of people who held that history are no longer with us. And so I found it really valuable just sort of in life in general, and also sort of in thinking about this book, in talking to people who hold a part of history that is sort of belongs to all of us. Even as I'm investigating my own personal history, I needed other people's stories. I needed the sort of larger chorus to inform and expand the world that I find myself in.
Yeah.
I really appreciate that, and also relate to it in my own fashion. So I can't come from a very specific, fairly small subculture of weed children, growing up in a family of outlaws. And my folks, this is maybe different from other kids who grew up in drug families, but my folks were very open with me from the beginning about what their work was, the fact that it was illegal, and the fact that it was not immoral. It was very important for my folks that I understood from the beginning that we were illegal but not wrong. Yeah. And so, and I knew that before I could spell my own name. I knew that from the very beginning. So it's really core to my identity to be an outsider and kind of an outlaw, which is in a way a perfect setup for writing, because we have to have this ability to step outside and look at the world with some distance, with some separation. But of course, as a child, it set me up to be isolated and in some ways lonesome, very separate from the other kids around me. I didn't connect with people my age. But where I really connected, where I really felt at home, was in my mom's chosen family, which was mostly folks from the LGBTQ community who I thought of as surrogate aunties and uncles. And I loved hanging out with adults much more than children. I felt very lost among kids. We had nothing to talk about. But with the adults, I felt very welcome. And so it's strange, I feel like in a way it was such a small little culture. It was a family of just a couple people, but then the extended family was richer. And of course, when the crisis came along, and folks started getting sick, and we lost some people. I also had this child's view of the incredible bravery and compassion and love that rose up within that community. And that was where I found my teachers, as far as how to lead a proper life, how to stand up for things. And so it was one of my main motivations for writing this book, was a frustration around seeing the role of AIDS activism in cannabis activism being erased.
Mm-hmm.
When we talk about modern cannabis, we talk about money, first and foremost. We talk about venture capitalism. We talk about medical marijuana, usually in the context these days of anxiety, epilepsy, something sanitized, something no blame. But really, we wouldn't have this access without AIDS activism. That was what broke through the many decades of prohibition. So it was, I wrote this with a real feeling of wanting to rescue that piece of history. And it's interview driven. So it's mostly driven by stories from elders. I really felt it beholden upon me as somebody who had access to these stories to make sure that they got told in some way. So anyway, I really appreciate your comment about that.
Yeah, did that feel like a lot of pressure for both of you, for telling, almost becoming like a spokesperson for whatever part of yourself you're talking about? Does that feel like a weight, or, that you have to get it right for someone other than yourself?
Do you want to take that?
Sure. Yeah, I was terrified. I was terrified up until and after publication day, but throughout the entire writing process. As I say, I started collecting these stories about 12 years before publication of the book. So it was a lot of interviewing. and I think of it a lot more as a cultural history of a community than I do as a memoir, although that's how it's packaged, and it has those aspects, but it's much more about the community. And since recording stories, some of my subjects have passed on. And I know that I'm the person who's been entrusted with this story, right? And especially with regard to the AIDS crisis, which is actually just maybe the last third to a quarter of the book. It's not the whole story. Mm-hmm. But for me, it was the emotional center of it. It was the gravitational center of the book for me. And I was so scared of getting it wrong. Oh my God! Especially because I'm an ally and I'm queer spawn, but I'm not. I'm hetero. I'm cis. I'm white. I've got all the privilege in the world. I haven't had to fight for those privileges, and so I am an outsider documenting something within this community that I find meaningful and inspiring. But as an outsider, if you are not able to write with the utmost care and compassion and research very, very carefully, a mistake is a terrible insult, I find, in that kind of context. So yeah, it was a lot of pressure.
Yeah.
I felt a similar sort of pressure, but I did, my book is not really based on research beyond sort of the story seeking that, you do with your chosen family and your family of birth. And one of the things I kept in mind really prominently for me is that I only wanted to tell stories that were completely mine to tell, because I was writing a memoir and because I was writing a comic memoir. I had to always be aware of where the joke was, and the joke always had to be me. And I didn't want it to be self-deprecating, but I wanted it to be honest. And so no one else, be it my family members, my spouse, my friends, no one else could be the butt of the joke. And I couldn't tell a story that didn't belong to me. And so there are good stories that aren't fully my stories. And those didn't get in the book. It's, for me, nobody in my family was like, what we would love is if you, our fame-obsessed son, would write a book, put all our business out on Front Street. We would love that. Now they're very happy about it. You know, they're
Yeah.
like, oh, we're in a book. I'm like, oh, now you're happy. But before, it can be, you know, it can feel dangerous because you don't know who is holding your story. But one of the big concerns for me was figuring out how to tell a story that I felt was my story, and felt was central to an American narrative. I don't think I'm the main character of America, but I reject the narrative that I'm a side character, a tertiary character. I think each one of us is the main character, you know, which, you know, I think there's a bad way of interpreting that, but I hope you take it in the spirit that I'm saying it. And I think my goal was to write a book where people who were not like me could say like, oh, we are walking different paths, but our footsteps align. And so the work of doing that was really delicate in terms of not thinking of myself as needing to be explained. And my editor, Sarah Weiss at Ballantine, was really, really, she was so influential in that respect. There were passages of the book, and I think maybe the passage I read may have been one of them originally, where I would explain certain things about Black culture, gay culture, myself, as if from like through a scientific study, like you couldn't possibly understand this. And she was like, who is your reader? Why are you assuming the reader doesn't know this? And I was like, I don't know. I don't know. And she's like, write with familiarity, and because that breeds familiarity. And if people don't understand what one reference is, if somebody doesn't know who Kareem Abdul-Jabbar is, you know, this isn't the example, but whatever, you know, they can Google it. And that was really empowering to me, to have somebody in publishing and to have a white person tell me, like, this is your book and you're allowed to tell your story without apologizing for it or making it strange. And that was that was a powerful moment in the development of the book.
Yeah, that's great. This is a little related, just thinking about like technically putting the story together, and I'll make some assumptions here. I always feel like writers who write about their own lives or their families are usually doing so to try to understand themselves. A lot of people start out with journaling and they just kind of never stop. They're trying to figure out what it all means, who they are. And so I'm thinking when you're doing that, you already are processing so much. So you're doing that first, but then also you're turning that into a story that can eventually be published. Like Alia, like you said, you had 12 years of interviews. Y'all probably have written so much, you researched, how did you then turn around and get past the personal layer of how close you were to it maybe, and tell it in a way that people would want to read it?
So I worked in a backwards direction from how most memoirists do. I was a very reluctant memoirist and still am. I didn't really want to write about, find how I found my belly button. It just wasn't my fascination. I was really fascinated with the subculture. Mm-hmm. So, and just I just felt like I'd seen such a richness of life experienced by my elders. So those were the stories I wanted to document, were the stories of my elders. And
you just happened to be related to them instead of being around.
Yeah. So, I mean, I had this access is the thing is, when I started, we were not where we are today with legalization either. But I had access to growers and dealers, and they would talk with me and tell me all of their secrets, tell me the whole story, and trust that I was going to use it in a way that would not be harmful. So this actually began as an oral history. And there was a time when it got shopped as an oral history. Okay. And did not sell. The publishing world wanted nothing to do with that. So it went in the boneyard for like 8 years and just moldered. 6 years maybe. And I dug it back up in the lead up to the 2016 election, which was when California was really looking at legalizing adult recreational use. And there were all these conversations in the media about marijuana and medical cannabis. And I just was getting so frustrated with the pieces of history missing from that. So I thought, now's the time.
Yeah.
And I pulled it back out and wrote it from a more personal lens. So I had to write myself into the story. The memoir was the memoiristic aspects, or the memoir sections are the last sections I wrote.
Yeah, it's hard to call it a memoir because it is so much your mother's story.
Yeah.
But yeah, it tells your story in there too.
Right.
Was
I
that
sometimes call it a memoir.
Ooh, I like that.
But
We
I'm
love a
born
pun.
halfway through the book. So I had to
Yeah.
inhabit my parents' point of views, which was a very strange process. Easy with my mom because we're close. We talk all the time. I can rummage through her stuff. She doesn't care. We don't have any secrets. But my dad and I were estranged when I began, and we're barely talking really. And so in order to write him with empathy, I had to spend an enormous amount of time getting to know him. And he was so interested in that process himself that it ended up completely transforming our relationship. And we're now very close. And during those many years, and that many year process, my dad came out of the closet for the first time as bisexual. He's now a wonderful gay guy, and his whole relationship with the story changed. So it was like a really long process, but a very cool one in the end. And so much of this story is given to me by other people that, in order to make sure that I was telling it in the most empathetic way possible, I did have my major characters read their parts of the book so they could tell me if it was accurate according to how they felt. So that it can really, sometimes I'm in their bodies. It's just surreal. I'm in my mom's body while I'm being born. That is just, yeah. It's a kind of meta you don't want to experience.
Eric, what about you? Did you need to run anything by some family members?
I mean, I did. I gave them all a very early draft of the book in Word, and I was like, I'll change anything. I'll change your name to Lucille McGillicuddy. I don't care. And I was very nervous because you don't know. You don't know. You don't want to hurt anyone unintentionally. And it's hard, I think, to also see yourself through someone else's eyes, even if it's kind. And, that process, nobody asked me to change anything. In fact, I sent it to, I written about an ex of mine, and I just changed his name. And I was like, anybody who doesn't, there's no enemies in my book, but there are a couple people who don't come off great. And the ex actually comes out fine, I think. But he ended with me, and he was mad at me in real life. And I was like, great, whatever. I'll just change your name, and then I won't get sued. I don't know how the law works, but I'm sure that's fine. But he reached out to me out of the blue as I was in the middle of, I guess, probably a round of edits. And he's like, hey, I hope you're doing well. And I was like, you know what, I am. And I actually have something I would like to share with you. It's an essay. And his big, so I sent it to him, and, he was very touched by what I wrote. And his only complaint was, he's like, why did you change my name to Ben? And I was like, so you won't sue me. And he's like, can I have my name back? I was like, fine. God, everyone is so demanding. It's really ridiculous.
I was really surprised by what people asked for me to change and what they did not. I just want to, I was so sure that my dad would be upset about certain things. Like I expose him sexually, I expose his youthful foibles, and maybe he doesn't come off, he's not the hero of the story, let's just say. He's sort of an antagonist. He doesn't always come off well. Of course, he should have behaved better if he wanted to come off well, but so he reads these sections, and the only thing he asked me to change is when he felt like I was representing his psychic work as not coming from the best of intentions at all times. And I was like, okay, I can change that.
Not expected, but sure.
That's what you want to change? That's okay.
Yeah.
Does it ever cause you to think if someone you knew, or, a child or whatever, were to write about you, like, do you ever start to think like, what wouldn't I want put out there?
I don't even know what to say. I would have, I have no right. I would have no right to complain about anything. Anyone, you want to write something about me, just, go for it.
I guess
I've spent all my
that's a,
money.
right. That's a mature way of thinking about it. I think I'd be like, let me read that. All right, change this. Don't say I did that. I don't appreciate that. I mean, like, I'm the kind of person, it's funny. I'm like having a glass of wine on this broadcast, but like, I never get photographed drinking like a glass of wine at cocktail parties. I'm like, so like, oh, this is the image. So I can't. My children are not allowed to ever write about me, and that's the law. I'll sue them. So
Good luck.
I did have a friend write a song about me, a good friend,
Oh.
and the first lyric is in the song is, "She threw up on a Porsche on Park Avenue," and I was like, really? Really? I feel like I should be embarrassed about this. I didn't make her change it, but I was a little bit like, that doesn't sound very professional. But I mean, how often do you get a song written about you? So what?
Yeah,
I mean,
take what you
True.
can get.
what am I
Yeah.
gonna say? Yeah.
Okay, I love, Alia, that you brought up going through your mom's stuff, because you talked about that in the book, going through boxes of artifacts. And Eric, you also had a moment, right, when you're in your parents' basement, and I can't remember exactly what happens, but there's a car wreck that leads you going through the box of things. And I thought that was interesting that y'all both had those moments where you're going through these like artifacts of your life, kind of tangible pieces. And I'm curious to hear about what it was like in the moment doing that, either knowing you might write about those things one day or reflecting on it later.
Yeah.
Did you find anything surprising, Eric?
Well, I didn't. Well, like, so the story with mine is a car drove through the wall of my parents' house, and which, whatever
Like it
happens.
does.
It was the second time that happened. They live on the Iditarod, so what are you gonna do? But the car landed on the part of the basement, my parents' basement, where all my old high school stuff was. So the only thing I was really going through was my old stuff. And in that moment, it was it was like a very low point in my life, and I write about that a little bit in the book, but it's from a narrative point of view, being able to like go watch a character, watch yourself go through things. I feel like has such juicy potential, and so that essay really changed a lot over the course of development, just trying to figure out what we needed to do with that information. But in the moment, it was funereal, because there's a hole in my parents' house, covered in plastic. There was a orange cone in the middle of the basement. I was like, who brought the cone? There's dust everywhere. It looks like a disaster. My mother had ankle surgery, so she couldn't come down the stairs.
Oh, yeah.
It just seemed tragic. Like, the whole thing seemed tragic. And then all my little young adult novels and my yearbooks were covered in like rainwater, I guess, and car grease. And so the essay ends, spoiler alert, the essay ends with me like throwing everything away, which is, in the telling, cathartic. In the moment, it felt completely disastrous, because I didn't know what was coming next. That's the thing I love about memoir, is that you do get to choose where your story begins, and you do get to choose where it ends. And the emotional arc of a life is a scatter plot. I feel like there are times where you're like, I'm getting out of bed, and I'm going through life, I'm hitting all my marks, and inside you're like, I'm miserable. I mean, like, hello, I'm talking to you on Zoom in the middle of a pandemic 2 weeks before the election. I'm doing great.
Yeah.
But like, and so I think one of the things that's really exciting about memoir is taking that scatter plot of emotions and putting it onto, the rising action. Like, I did this, it moved me along, it got me to this place, and figuring out how to speak to both voices at once. And how I acknowledge that it felt awful in the moment, but it got me to where I needed to be. And and none of that's not replaceable.
Yeah.
And so I appreciate that.
Yeah, that's beautiful. And I love what you're saying about memoir too. It is really, it's a prerogative of the memoirist to make things tidy that are not. That's what we get to do. That's our reward for all of this mostly miserable work. But so, okay, so this was actually kind of a turning point in my process writing this book. I was having a really hard time in going back to the before times and writing about the period before I was born. I was having a really hard time imagining my parents in love, because by the time my memories really solidified, they were fighting constantly. And there were years of accumulated bitterness at that point. But they had a very dramatic and you're the one kind of a beginning. They had this feeling that they were fated. My dad psychically predicted their union, and he psychically predicted my birth. It was like really overblown hippie magic stuff. And I was trying to imagine them in love with each other, and I just couldn't do it. And at some point in a conversation, I was asking my mom, like, why did you decide to move in with him? You know, there's just so much resentment between them now. And she said, I think he asked me in a love letter. And I was like, what? I mean, scratch the record. I couldn't imagine my dad writing love letters. Unthinkable. I had to travel down to Palm Springs from San Francisco to go through boxes to find this love letter. I'm like, this is impossible. And we went through boxes days after days and days and days, because my mom's totally disorganized. And at the bottom of the last box on the last day, there's a stack of letters. And I open one of the letters, and a Polaroid photograph falls out on my lap. And it's a picture, it's like a selfie that my dad took with a Polaroid in the mirror, and he's stark ass nude with an erect penis.
No.
It's a dick pic. It's a full dick pic of my dad. And I screamed and dropped it on the floor, and my mom's like, what? I gave it to her. She screamed, hilarity ensued. And then I read the letter, and this first letter was like pure smut, but it's like really 70s smut. So it's all these, it's like, I'm gonna blank you on the floor of the bathroom of the top floor of the Hyatt Regency. It's all these like, what is going on? So I had to read that. So
scarring.
Yeah, she just made me read it aloud. Anyway, but it was a stash of letters. There's like 5 of them, and aside from this really raunchy one, they were mostly terribly, terribly romantic. And although it was kind of spacey hippie stuff, or very spacey hippie stuff, it also was super sincere, and you could just feel the enthusiasm of that first like whack upside the head when you fall in love with somebody. And so then this is what prompted me to go to my dad's, and we were still estranged, but I could tell that there was another half of these letters, and I thought he must have them in a box. I need to read both sides of this conversation. So I tell my dad about it, and the first thing he says is, well, that's how you were born. And then he asks if he can see the letter, if he can see the photograph, because he wants to see what he used to look like naked.
No.
but it brought us together. And then, so I go to his house. I hadn't been to his house in years, and found these letters. And it was like through both of us, and he sat there and read them with me. And it was through us reading about this lost love that kind of brought the whole family back together. And then from there on out, it was a shared project, and they talk again now. And
that's great.
It was interesting. Yeah, it healed all this stuff, and I never would have expected that.
Yeah.
So get really your parents' boxes, even Eric.
Yeah, I've already started, just for fun. We've got a question over here from the chat box. A couple, actually. Okay, Kevin Brockmeyer, he's a writer himself. He says, to both of you, if you could choose anyone else to write the book about you, who would you choose?
That's a good one. I think I I think
Could be a
I
celebrity.
I deeply admire David Rakoff. You know, obviously, he's passed on. He's one of the major reasons that I am the writer that I am. I
Hmm.
love his sardonic, salty voice. And so I'd love for him to sort of rip my life to shreds. I would love that. Or, someone living, Samantha Irby, I think has taken on that mantle
Oh,
in a
yeah.
really strong way. So yeah, one of them would be great. I'd be mad though, because I'd be like, I feel like we're sort of in competition. I mean, not really. Like they are much better than I am, but I'd be like, I wanted that gig.
Yeah.
Oh my God. I find this a little difficult to imagine, especially since I'm not much of a memoirist. Again, like I don't love writing about myself. Um, but I would definitely like it to be, I wouldn't want it to be a friend. I would definitely like it to be somebody who can look at me with a critical eye and call me out on my shit. I feel like when friends have maybe written about me, I feel embarrassed when it's too nice, because I don't know. Yeah, I deserve to be torn asunder like everyone else. It's an honor to be dissected in a thoughtful way. Of our contemporaries, I've developed a really deep fondness for Bridget Davis, who wrote a book that is probably the most similar to Home Baked, in intent. She wrote, it's a memoir. But her mom was a numbers runner in 60s and 70s Detroit, and so she wrote this really beautiful portrait of her mother and also of the culture. And I have so much respect for her thought process and delicacy. But
Mhm.
I don't imagine that she would do me the honor. I don't know.
We've got another question. Do you have any future projects in the works, and what do you envision your next book to be about?
Yeah, I've got on Tuesday, this coming Tuesday, I have another book coming out.
Yeah.
It's called Reclaiming Her Time, The Power of Maxine Waters. It's a book. I'm going to do this.
Do it.
Please do.
It's very pretty.
Mhm.
And it's in the style of the notorious RBG. It's a lively biography of the representative, that traces her 40 plus year career and her space in the in culture and also in pop culture. And then I am at work right now on a young adult novel as well, that
Okay.
I hopefully will be out in 2022.
Oh, exciting.
Yeah.
Very cool. You're so much farther along than I am. Um, I am working on another family memoir of sorts. It's not so much that I want to write about my family all the time. It's just that my family is so weird. So they demand it.
It's like they're
Great
just
grandmother.
handing it to you, the material.
What can you do? Yeah, my great grandmother married a ghost, and
Oh
Yes,
yeah.
I love this.
I forgot about that.
yeah, and she lived with him in matrimonial harmony for decades. So it's a story that I grew up with, but she also wrote a memoir about it and an earlier memoir. So I have these ancestral texts to work with, and they are wild. They're wild. So I'm still trying to figure out what the hell I'm doing,
What to do with
what
that.
to do with this. But that is what I'm working on.
That's amazing.
I
Somehow
cannot
I had
wait for
forgotten that detail. Oh, let's see. Okay, I wanted to talk a little bit, this is like super broad in general, but about creative nonfiction in general and finding your voice. And just kind of tell us a little bit about when that happened for you and what that process has looked like. Has it changed throughout your career, or did you know early on how you would write?
Mm-hmm.
Or with every project, maybe you feel kind of a different way depending on what kind of writing you're doing.
Okay.
Thank you.
There's like the 5-second timeout. Okay.
Right.
Okay. um, I came to nonfiction writing in a slow and sort of roundabout way. As I said, I didn't want to write memoir,
Mhm.
and I didn't keep journals ever. I was never very good at that, and so I wanted to write fiction. And what happened was that I sent a piece that I was calling fiction, but it had enough nonfiction details to be noticeable, not recognizable to me, but just noticeable that obviously was being drawn from life. And I sent that to Tin House, which at the time I was really desperate to get into. And an editor there wrote back and was like, I love your essay. Maybe we can take a different angle. How would you feel about writing an essay about your dad? And I was like, the last thing I want to do is write an essay about my dad. What are you talking about? But of course, I was determined to try, and Michelle Willigen, the editor, was just marvelous. We went back and forth for over many drafts, and she'd look at a draft and she'd write a letter and say, you haven't found the heart yet, keep digging for the, you haven't found the heart yet. And she just pushed and pushed and pushed until I had a breakthrough and found the heart, and that piece was published. And I really haven't written fiction since then, because I just found such satisfaction in learning, really learning how to interrogate nonfiction material. That was what
Mhm.
became exciting to me, is learning how to ask and demand and insist, of whether it's my own life or some other nonfiction material. It was so much more fun to me than just making shit up.
Yeah.
As much as I respect making shit up, but
But there's also so much material to work with in real life, so much
yeah,
weirdness.
yeah.
What about you, Eric?
I think I can trace my finding of my voice back to oral storytelling,
Mm.
and like I consider myself a writer. I always have, but I think there were guardrails on my writing for a long time, that because I felt like I needed to occupy a particular space or follow a particular set of rules. But then I got involved with a couple different things. Like one, therapy is very helpful. And you just sort of, I mean, like I recommend that in general. The first people I think in my acknowledgments are my therapists, and I mean that. And so just sitting in for an hour and sort of working stuff out was really helpful in terms of like narrative construction and figuring out what things are really about. But then I also, I've been telling stories with storytelling organizations like The Moth for the last 7 or 8 years. And I host The Moth in DC and Philadelphia now. And that mix of hosting really changed things for me, because I got to sort of just tell stories in between stories, just keep the show moving. And so
Mhm.
I'm like constantly sort of pulling things out from the back of the brain and in real time figuring out how to make it a story, but also make it engaging. And that released to me. And realizing I can just sort of talk. And I don't like, I could never like these essays. I can't, I'm not the kind of writer who can sort of like speak into a tape recorder an essay. Like I just have to, my fingers need to move. I have to be typing it.
Mhm.
But there was something, a safety switch that went off in my brain that said, you have to write in this way. And instead I was like, well, let me just tell you this story. Like this
Yeah.
weird thing that happened. The passage that I read to you, I was trying to figure out a way into that essay for a long time. The essay is about a disastrous hair choice I made. And I just couldn't figure out how to set the scene, to set up the stakes around what hair meant culturally to me. And I'm like driving back from a writing retreat where I did not get the work done I wanted to get done. And it just sort of, I'm like just talking to myself in the car. And then it sort of came to me. So I had to pull over into like a Chick-fil-A parking lot, get in the back of my car, plug my computer in. I drive a hybrid. You're welcome. And type it out. So it really is that permission. And it's something that I have to keep reminding myself sorry, I'll wrap up here. As I explore different forms, there's always different things where I'm like, oh, if you're writing for the Times, you have to write like this. If you're writing
Yeah.
a pilot, you have to write like this. And I'm really trying to challenge myself always to write like me. And it's a daily challenge, struggle, you know.
Well, I want to say y'all are both succeeding. Your books are wonderful. So I think if it's a daily challenge, y'all are doing great at it. And I can't wait to read what you come out with next. We're coming to the end now. So I think we've got to go ahead and wrap it up because I've got some reminders for everyone. I just want to thank you, Eric and Alia, so much for joining us. This has been so much fun. Y'all are a delight, so easy to talk to, and we really appreciate the time you gave. To our audience, thank you so much for tuning in. Remember to buy books, buy these books, go to the CAL's website or Wordsworth in the Heights, buy locally when you can, support your library when you can. Follow Eric and Alia on social media and keep an eye out on their upcoming projects. And lastly, the Six Bridges Book Festival is going on through Sunday, which means there's even more events to check out. So go to their website and find them. And thanks again to everyone. We really appreciate it.
Thank you.
Have a great night.
Thank you so much.
All right. Bye.
Bye.